The Seed and the Sower by Sir Lawrence Vander Post. Chapter 2. A Brother. I had a brother once, and I betrayed him. The betrayal in itself was so slight that most people would find betrayal too exaggerated a word, and think me morbidly sensitive for so naming it. Yet as one recognizes the nature of the seed from the tree by its fruit, and the fruit from the taste on the tongue, so I know the betrayal from its consequences and the tyrannical flavor it left behind it in my emotions. That is one of the fundamental things about betrayal, and which perhaps is better set down here beyond doubt right at the beginning. Though I say it without pride or humility, but merely as a fact of life, I speak now as an expert in this matter. And as such, I can assure you that one of the most significant characteristics of betrayal is that it is neither spectacular nor presumptuous in origin. Indeed, those treacheries destined to reach furthest in their consequences prefer not to be obvious or dramatic in their beginnings, but rather to wait, humbly and unostentatiously, until they are ready to bear their bitter fruit in maturity. They seem to favor presenting themselves to the unguarded heart select to become their own private seedbed as trivialities in the daily routine of life, as insignificant occurrences so self-evident that no question of a choice, and so no chance of rejection arises out of their appearance on the familiar scene of everyday events. In fact, betrayal behaves as if it were worth no more than the miserable 30 pieces of silver that were paid for the greatest and most meaningful betrayal of all time. That, I suggest, is not only a fundamental, but also one of the most frightening aspects of it. Contrast betrayal, for instance, with something else which also grows out of very little, namely faith. No matter how far awareness pursues faith, even if it is to the outermost ends of being, faith still stands positively on the threshold of the world. There, faith still will move mountains, provided it has some substance in the heart. But betrayal has no need of anything particular in order to exist. It can begin most effectively as a mere refusal to be, a casual negation, as the insubstantial pollen of the deadly nightshade of nothingness. Like the geometric point in the intuitive heart of Euclid, betrayal needs neither magnitude nor size for its existence, but only position. Here, then, is the moment, the place, and the circumstances. Here the position in my own life of the betrayal of which I wish to speak. There were 4 of us children in my family. I was the first, then came 2 girls, and lastly my brother. But both my sisters died in one of those typhoid epidemics which were inflicted upon our remote African world, like one of the plagues of Egypt before each of our fanatical droughts. So my brother and I were left, as my mother one day put it, under an emotion that I was too young to share, not only to be brothers, but also sisters to each other. I mention this here not out of a belated recognition of what she must have felt, but because I had reason to remember the remark many years later. Between my brother and myself there was a difference of 7 years, and these 7 years now had a difference of their own, because of the tender flesh and blood so brutally extracted from them. They moved lean and hungry in my memory with the slow, mediumistic pace of the famished out of the riverbed of time, like the gaunt herd in Pharaoh's dream, which warned Joseph of the great hunger and thirst to come. This, then, added a particular stress to this separation in age between my brother and myself, making it a difference not only of life, but of death as well. However, this was only one of the many differences between us, all of which I have to mention because they contribute to my story. To begin with, I was born fair with dark blue eyes. I was well made. I grew up tall and strong without hurt or impediment to assail the physical confidence implicit in my step and carriage. My body was at home in the wide physical world about us, and my person at ease with the people in it. I seemed to move as appropriately to my environment as does a gilt-edged fish with its silky swish in an amber sea. From an early age, I played, rode, shot, and worked with the best of my childhood peers. In my response to the challenge with which the disdainfully cunning and infinitely experienced old earth of Africa teased and provoked the life it contained, I'm told that I was tireless and fearless. I was also well-spoken and good-looking. In fact, this last sentence is so much of an understatement of something which had an important effect on my character that I ought really to enlarge on it. The truth is that from an early age most people found my looks disturbing, and many of them were strongly attracted to me on account of my appearance. This again is one of those things I say without pride or humility, without vanity or self-satisfaction. I have long since come to the diamond point of the tumult within myself, where facts alone, and nothing but the facts, accurately observed and truly interpreted, can move me. I know that only facts can save me, and I long passionately to be able, from the facts of my being, to forge a weapon strong enough to enable me to fight back against the power and pomp of unreality, which is marching so boastfully against both me and the spirit of my time. But over this matter of my appearance, if I do recognize any other emotion in myself, it is one of subtle and pervasive distaste. Perhaps this sounds ungrateful to life, which has conferred such favors on me. Yet the truth remains. Part of me strongly resented my looks, and blamed them too for what became of me. We had a neighbor who was born a dwarf, and as a child, whenever I saw him, I used to pity him and feel grateful that I had not been given his shape. Yet today I am not sure that I should not have envied him. I simply do not know which constitutes the greatest danger to the integrity of being, to attract or to repel, to incur the dislikes or likes of one's fellow men. The dwarf, after all, had only pity to fear, and men being what they are, that is never excessive. But I had their instant, magnetic liking for my enemy, and before I knew where or even who I was, I had become a prisoner of the effect I had on them. The dwarf was firmly shackled to his deformity, but I was shackled not so much to my good looks as to what people, after seeing me, first imagined, and then, through their imaginations, compelled me to be. I know now that from my earliest age the effect that I had on those about me enticed me away from myself, drew me out of my own inner focus of being, and left me irrevocably committed to the role that my admirers and the obscure laws of their magnetic attraction automatically demanded of me. To this day I shiver at the recollection of the cold, impersonal power and efficiency of the mechanisms of this compulsion, both in me and others, which force me to lend my little measures of irreplaceable flesh and blood to the shadowy desires, phantom wishes, and unlived selves of those around me. Slowly but surely I grew into a bitter estrangement from myself, a prodigal son in a far country of famished being, without any inkling of a dream that could have worked on my errant raw material. I suffered, as it were, from the curse of Helen, whose face launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium, that Helen whose image still haunts the eyes of men, wherein she was held prisoner for so long. Yet I was not Narcissus bound to any lilied reflection of my physical body. I never saw myself as good-looking. I have stared often in mirrors and shop windows, but not with pride, often only furtively, as if afraid of seeing also in the reflection what I felt myself to be. For despite the plausible object evidence to the contrary, I have always known that I was also an ugly person. I knew that what others found so attractive was only an outer aspect of something greater to which both it and this other ugliness were equally and irrevocably joined. In some mysterious way, I was conscious that there was never one but always a pair of us, always a set of Siamese twins sitting down nightly to sup at the round table of myself, a pair of brothers designed to nourish and sustain, yet also inexplicably estranged and constantly denying each other. Yes, despite all provocations, I could never see myself as others saw me. The reflection that has become my master reflection is not silver quick in the crystal light of a modern mirror, but is somewhat withheld, like the slow gleam behind the glassy surface of a particular pool, which used to lie in our black Bushveld wood like a wedding ring in the palm of a Negro's hand. Oh, how clearly I remember that pool in that far distant dawn when I first dismounted from my horse to quench our thirst at its golden water. I was kneeling down, my right hand held out to scoop the burning water, and my left holding the reins of the steam-silver horse beside me, as before drinking, it carefully blew the dawn-illumined pollen of spring in a rainbow smoke across the flaming surface. And there, suddenly, beyond the rose-red bars of the rhythmical vibration set up by my horse's fastidious lips, I saw my own reflection coming up out of the purple depths of the pool to meet me. I could not see clearly. The reflection remained shadowy, very different from my bright morning figure bent low over it. It stayed there, a dark, dishonored presence, straining in vain for freedom of articulation against that trembling, dawn-incarnadine water, as if the corrugations on the surface were not the bars of a natural vibration, but rather those of a cage contrived to hold it forever prisoner. At the time it made me sad. It would have been better, perhaps, if it had made me angry. Who knows? Certainly not I. But to return to the differences between my brother and myself. In appearance he was not at all like me. He was very dark, in accordance with an unpredictable law which seems to dominate reproduction in both my father's and mother's families. His hair was as thick and dark as mine was fair and fine. His skin was a Mediterranean olive, and his eyes, which were his best feature, were wide and of an intense, radiant blackness. I could never look in them without feeling curiously disturbed and uncomfortable. I wish I could say why, but the discomforts of the spirit are beyond reason. Suffering is only a stroke of time's implacable Excalibur, dividing meaning from meaninglessness. I am forced none the less to attempt an explanation. There were moments when those deep eyes of his seemed to me to be unbearably defenseless. They seemed too trusting, too innocent of the calculation and suspicion of our civilized day. And because of this they seemed, though I am never sure regarding the personal emotions or intentions of my brother, to hold a kind of reproach against me in the world wherein I was so conspicuously at my ease. I wish I could deal more firmly with this subtle discomfort, but I cannot. I only know it was there from the beginning, and as far back as I can remember, it expressed itself from time to time in an involuntary feeling of irritation which, no matter how unreasonable and unfair, no matter what precautions I took to the contrary, would break out impatiently from me. What made it worse was that my brother never seemed to mind. He would take it all quite naturally, almost as part of his own dark, impervious birthright. When I begged his pardon awkwardly, as I invariably did, he would look at me warmly and say quickly, "But it was nothing, Ubut. Nothing at all. Don't worry so." In fact, he would behave as if I had just rendered him some great service, as if my very impatience and irritation had given us both an opportunity which otherwise might have never existed. It was all very mysterious, and I have had to make my peace with it by accepting it as something inevitable. But the flaw, if it is a flaw, inflicted by life on me is also, I suspect, incorporated in the master seed of the being and greater becoming of us all, just as the infinitesimal flaw that gave birth to a pearl in the shell. One has said that there is no greater love than that a man should lay down his life for his friends, yet is it not, perhaps, as great a love that a man should live his life for his enemies, feeding their enmity of him without ever himself becoming an enemy, until at last enmity has had surfeit, and his enemies are free to discover the real meaning of their terrible hunger, just as my brother provoked and endured my strange hostility without ever becoming hostile to me? However, I am expert not in love, but in betrayal, and as little entitled to make points on the specialist's behalf as he would on mine, so I shall not press the issue unduly. Yet, for the sake of the proportions of my narrative, I must add that I was not alone in my reaction to my brother. He had much the same effect on most people with whom he came in regular contact. I grew up, as indicated, tall and gracefully made. He, from the beginning, was a square, short, awkwardly shaped person, immensely strong, but ponderous, and inclined to be clumsy at his movements. He was not, I fear, prepossessing to look at. What magic he had in his eyes, and they, unfortunately, made one uncomfortable. His head was too big even for his broad shoulders, yet his face, after such roughness of stature, was disconcertingly tender, while his brow, with the double crown of hair at the center, was from birth deeply furrowed. The effect was of a face profoundly still, though darkly withheld. Yet it could become startlingly light, even beautiful, when he laughed and showed his even white teeth. But unfortunately in public he rarely laughed. Laughter seemed to be something he kept for the two of us when the tension between us lessened. So, as a rule, his face seemed folded, brooding over his nature rather like one of our black African hens over her nest, head cocked slightly toward the earth, senses deaf to the music of the sun stroking the great harp of light in one of our feverish summer days, listening only to the electric expectancy of life within her. At school I was good in most things, games as well as studies. My brother had great difficulty in scraping through his examinations, and could take no interest and acquire no skill in sport. I was a fast and a first-rate sprinter. He was slow and an indefatigably plodding walker. I loved animals, the flame-flickering game and sunbirds of Africa. He took no great interest in them, but from childhood was absorbed in all that grew in the earth. I had no patience for planting and sowing. He seemed to plow, and he loved to plow and to sow. It was remarkable, too, how successful his clumsy fingers were. Whatever he put in the earth seemed to grow and blossom. He used to walk behind his favorite span of roan purple oxen from dawn to sunset, his deep single-furrow plow turning over waves of Africa's scarlet earth like the prow of a Homeric black ship, the swell of a wine-red morning sea. He would come home in the twilight after a day's plowing, deep in content. Often I've found him resting, silent on the handlebars of his plow. "A penny for your thoughts, Booty," I would greet him. He would never answer at once. Then he'd say slowly, "Just smelling the earth, you know. There's not a flower in the earth that smells so good to me as freshly turned over earth." Then I would notice it too, that smell of titanic perspiration in that glandular earth, of the ancient land charging the fiery air all around us like the black quintessential of a magician's spell. Finally, when the rough old greatcoat of the earth was turned inside out and its antique lining lying velvet in the sun, he would stride across the naked land sowing his first corn like someone in an illustrated New Testament parable. I would watch him bestride the passionate soil, noticing his awkward lumbering gait, as if his being always had presupposed this heaving earth beneath his feet, even as a sailor's feet always presupposes the swinging sea. His intuition in regard to the land, too, was uncannily accurate. As a child, I have watched him standing absorbed over a patch of earth for so long that in the end I have exclaimed impatiently, "Are you going to stand all there dreaming? Wake up, for God's sake!" "Sorry, U-Boot," he would say equably. "I was wondering what we should suggest planting here. It might grow something pretty good, but what?" "Well, we'll have to try before we can know," I would reply unmollified. "All the same looking does help, U-Boot," he would answer mildly, or words to that effect. And despite my sniff of unbelief, I had an uncomfortable suspicion that perhaps he was right. In a way that I could not understand, he and the earth had their own magnetic exchange of each other's meanings. When we got home, he would suggest a crop to our father, and that crop, as often as not, is growing there fruitfully to this day in the course of its lawful rotation. Besides all this, he possessed a remarkable gift of water divining. I remember so well the day when we first discovered that he possessed this power. I was already almost a man, but he was still a boy. Our father, anxious to add to our existing supplies, already weakened by a succession of droughts, was looking for new water. Accordingly, he had called in the help of one of those water diviners, who were always drifting through our land in the service of their strange intuition like Old Testament prophets. We watched the gaunt old man arrive with a donkey led by a tiny black boy, watched him cut a forked stick from the nearest wild olive tree and strip down the stick from its precise classical leaf. Then he strode down to the selected site like Moses to the rock in the Vermilion desert at Horeb. Once there, he gripped the fork, prong placed tightly in the palm of each hand, but the stick itself pointed up at the blue sky like the hands of a pilgrim joined in prayer. Then, with a slow, ritualistic step, he walked across the scene from east to west, the fitful whirlpool eddies of hot afternoon air irreverently flicking his long beard out of the focus of his trance-like movement. When the critical moment came, the knuckles of his hands went white from the effort he was making to prevent the prongs of the fork turning in his grasp. But slowly, the point of the stick began to vibrate and waver until suddenly, despite all his exertions to prevent it, the point plunged straight down, quivering like an arrow in a drawn bow over the earth at his feet. As it happened, an involuntary murmur went up from the white people present, and a marvelous "Yeah, boy!" came from our uninhibited black servants, followed by a laugh, which was not only a laugh, but also a release of tension, as if the charge which had mounted so mysteriously in the blood of the old man had welled up unbearably in them, too. Unperturbed by the reaction of the onlookers, the old man stopped instantly at that point, drew a long line with his finger east and west in the earth, retreated 30 paces to the south, and repeated his tense hypnotic walk to the north. His gift did not fail him. The stick plunged a second time, and there again he drew another line, south and north in the earth. Where the two lines crossed, he dug his heel into the ground and said to our father, "There's good water here, 2 strong arteries meeting about 100 feet down." He said, where the two lines crossed, he dug his heel into the ground and said to our father, "There's good water here, 2 strong arteries meeting about 100 feet down." I had just completed my first year of law at the university, and my newly awakened reason was irritated by the old man's air of simple assurance. I thought at once that he was just putting on an act to disguise a guess that could be no better than our own. I whispered so to my brother, but he, without emotion, quietly disagreed. "You're wrong, U-Boot." "Don't be so silly. How could anyone know?" I replied, irritated. "But I know," he answered mildly. Then, seeing the irritation mounting in me, he added quickly with an odd note of surprise, as if the explanation were news to him too. "I know because I believe it will work with me as well." "What?" I looked down at him, but there was no mistaking that he was in deadly earnest. "Let's prove it then," I said, quickly thinking it would do him no harm to make a fool of himself. Instantly he went up to the diviner without a trace of embarrassment. He said, "Would you mind if I tried it too?" The old man looked at him with quick surprise. Then he gave me a glance which somehow disturbed me before turning back to my brother. "Certainly," he answered. "Here's the stick. Be careful to hold it like this." He put the prongs of the stick in my brother's hand. "Grip it tight, keep your eyes on the point, and walk steadily, a step with each breath, and you will not fail to confound the unbelievers in our midst." Then we all turned to watch the awkward, lumbering figure of my brother imitate the diviner's performance. Intangible as these things are, there was no doubt that my own disapproval was beginning to communicate itself to the others, and there was an increasing feeling that the boy was being allowed to presume too much. However, my brother seemed unaware of this mood in the watchers. Young as he was, I could not help remarking the odd authority in his bearing. In fact, he repeated the diviner's performance faultlessly, and at the end of it all, the fork twisted earthwards, and where the old man had bent to make his cross, he too drew another like it in the earth with his forefinger. Then he stood up to look at us, no doubt expecting some acknowledgment for what he had done. But as if in mutual agreement that to give him too much credit for what had happened might add to his boyish presumption, after a few words we passed immediately into a busy discussion of the arrangements necessary for boring on the chosen spot. I do not know what my brother felt, but the scene has stayed with me, and often in a guilt-quick memory I have remembered him stooping awkwardly and with his clumsy finger making again his first sign of the cross in the thirsty sand. Oh, the mysterious inevitability of those crosses in our blood! This deep game of noughts and crosses played unremittingly, night and day, from one dimension of being to another of becoming. First the flaming sword of an archangel making a cross over the gate to the forbidden garden of our lost selves. Again, a cross over the doorway of the first ghetto to keep away the angel of death on the night of terror before exodus from nothingness, and the bondage of Egypt's plenty to another country of strange, unlikely promise across the desert. Then another cross, where darkness gathers steeply over the very promise itself. Always the significance of a long journey from bondage to a country not yet known. The negation which can only become positive when a cross has been nailed against it. Always, it seems, in the blank space at the end of the inadequate letter, lies a large cross for a kiss from that terrible lover, Life, who will never take no for an answer. So here, too, at the beginning of the boy about to become a man, was a cross made to mark the possibility of water in problematical sand. Yet if on that day automatically we tried to make nothing of my brother's gift, he was unaffected by this. He came up to me and said, "Look, U-Boot, it was much stronger than me." I looked unwillingly and saw that the bark had been stripped off the olive as it twisted and turned in his fist, and there, in the broad palm turned upward before my skeptical eyes, was the stigmata of the deed, the skin torn and the flesh red and watery from its struggle with the fierce earthbound wood. Looks as if you scratched yourself, I said coolly. Yet, that night, as we lay in the shared bed on the wide open stoop, looking up at a clear sky with the stars crackling and the Milky Way coming down like a river in flood, I begged his pardon. I admitted grudgingly that he may have been right, though it couldn't signify what he and the diviner thought it did. He replied, "Oh, that was nothing," and turning on his side, he instantly fell asleep, leaving me wakeful and dissatisfied. For there are degrees in nothingness. Nothingness has its own backward inevitability of erosion. On this occasion there was something specific for which I could beg his pardon, but the master nothing to which all these apprentice occasions are bound is so insubstantial that no question or thought of pardon arises. There remain still two essential differences between my brother and myself to enumerate, but before I do so, I must add that when my brother became a man, his gift for water divining was very much in demand in our remote world. He put it at the service of whoever needed it, but he would never accept any reward. Uncomfortable as it made many rich people to be under an obligation to him, he would never charge, saying, "I can't take payment for it. The gift isn't mine. If I took money for it, I know it would already leave me." I have mentioned already that physically I was well made, and my brother not so favored. Now I have to confess that he had a slight deformity. It was not in the least obvious, and my brother was able to conceal it almost entirely by arranging that his clothes were always slightly padded along the shoulders. It was not discernible as a specific deformity, and yet, in some way, it formed a sure center around which not only all that was odd in his appearance, but also all that in his nature was at variance with the world seemed to meet. It was amazing how, whether other people knew of his existence or not, sooner or later their eyes were compelled by the laws of my brother's own being to fasten on this spot between his shoulders. I don't know who was the more sensitive about it, he or I. All I do know is that between us we never referred to it by name. We always designated it by an atmospheric blank in our sentences. For instance, I would say, "But if you do go swimming there, wouldn't they see blank?" Or he to me, "Do you think if I wore that linen jacket, it would, blank, Instantly, we would both know that we were referring to the razor-edged hump between his shoulders. Self-contained as he was in his spirit, yet this deformity was a breach in my brother's sufficiency which he could never man, and any enemy from without who discovered it could walk through the breach at will. I have said we were both extremely sensitive about it, but perhaps it would be more accurate to say he was afraid because of it, irrationally afraid of what the world might think, feel, and be provoked to do on account of it. My own sensitiveness, on the other hand, although I passed it off to myself as a form of minding for him, was of a different order. This, after all, was a problem in a dimension which was peculiarly my own. I could not readily endure the thought of people setting eyes on the razor-edged hump behind my brother's broad shoulders, because I must have feared that it would reflect on me. I could not bear that anything related to me was not of the best. I had not learned to fear my lack of physical blemish as my brother did his deformity, and the scales in this matter of our appearance seemed so unfairly loaded against him. We could never appear together without people being reminded of it, though it was an inequality which was not of my making, and the blame, if such a word can be used for so impersonal a process, lay with life. Yet the fact remained that I was, no matter how unwillingly, the main instrument whereby this manifest inequality was kept alive. I think again of the man from Palestine when he said, "It may be that offense has to come in life, but woe to him by whom it comes." He might have spoken these words for me. My discomfort over my brother's deformity had yet another powerful stimulus. I must have known instinctively that however much people sympathized with my brother on a perfunctory level, underneath in the more spontaneous world of their emotions, they often felt embarrassed and even threatened by his departure from the norm. They could even secretly resent it and wish him out of the way. I say this confidently because I have found since, both in myself and others, that the greater the need for individual differentiation from a stagnant normality, the more we struggle and resent those who represent this difference. I've even noticed the same tendency in the behavior of animals, and I think now of one animal in particular who played a brief, mysterious role in my story. But all I submit here is that, in those far-off days, I and those around me, in our behavior to my brother, confirm this paradoxical law without ever knowing what we did. I grew up showing an excessive solicitude on behalf of my brother's deformity, firmly believing it was his feelings that I wanted to protect. Yet without realizing it, I was obliquely asserting values and defending feelings which belonged to me in my own world. In doing so, I was extremely popular with my fellow men. My brother at best was tolerated. It was most noticeable that the moment he entered a room wherein I had company restraint came in with him like winter's fog. I immediately began to defend and explain him without appearing to do so, and found myself acting out an elaborate apologia on his behalf. My friends then began to feel that they had a duty to deny the effect caused by his odd appearance, and soon the conversation became too artificial and self-conscious to be enjoyed. My brother grew up, apparently, a lonely, friendless person. Yet it sometimes seemed that I had more interests and friends than my life could contain. And now I come to the final difference between us. I was tone-deaf. I could not sing in tune. It may sound a slight matter scarcely worthwhile mentioning, but for me it was an odd and difficult handicap. Secretly, the fact that whenever I tried to join in any singing, I spoilt it, and it made me unsurprisingly happy. If I persisted, as often I did when I was younger, I merely provoked a titter which forced me quickly to desist. It was an added irony, too, that I, who was well adapted to my world, was utterly at odds with it in my singing, whereas my brother, whose nature always stood at such an acute angle, through his singing became completely at one. Even as a child, he had a clear, unhesitating soprano, which developed as he grew older into a manly and pleasantly rounded tenor. I remember going to look for him once in our garden on my first day home from school on a long summer vacation. The garden was immense, and I thought I would have difficulty in finding him. But I had just come to the edge of the orchard with its great yellow apricots, ruby peaches, purple plums and figs, pears, scarlet and pink cherries, and pomegranates all shining like Persian jewelry in the morning sun, when I heard his voice, lovely as I had never heard it before, soaring up from the center of the garden. He was singing something I didn't recognize, which had that curiously simple yet urgent up-and-down rhythm of the African idiom. To me, it sounded like primitive music before the mind and worldly experience had worked upon it. I stood there listening to him singing, feeling more and more shut out from I knew not what, but something that I recognized to be urgent and vital. In the end, I was overcome not by a nostalgia for the past, that is simple and well within the capacity of our awareness, but by a devouring homesickness for the future which is precipitated in our hearts, through a sense of what we have left uncompleted behind us. The little song became for me, to borrow a platitude of the present day, a signature tune reminding me always of my brother, as well as my own unrealized longings. Rij dir die dag, rij dir die mollig, rij dir die dag, van ver in die verte, brand jouw veertje, veer je man wat langer wag. The words, as you can see, even if you do not know our mother tongue, are simple enough. I can translate them freely in prose. Ride, ride through the day, ride through the moonlight, ride, ride through the night. For far in the distance burns your fire, for someone who has waited long. Where on earth did you learn that tune, and who wrote the words? I asked as I came on him watering seed beds beside a tree sullen with the weight of its yellow fruit. "Ach, U-boot," he answered, smiling in welcome, putting down his watering can and stretching his absurd frame. "It's just something that came bursting into my head one day while you were away." As he spoke, he had the same look on his face, but as when he made his cross beside the diviners in the sand. But if he was waiting for some sort of acknowledgement from me, he was again to be disappointed. "It's not bad," I replied. "Glad you think so," he answered. But he looked intently at me for a moment before he resumed his watering. I suppose, therefore, it was no accident that my brother's first serious brush with the world of his boyhood was caused by his sense of the musical fitness of things. In church, the family who occupied the pew behind us had remarkably loud voices, but no sense for tune. They all sang hymns loudly, usually slightly behind the rest of the congregation, and almost 2 tones out of true, or so my brother said. One Sunday morning they were singing with such magnificent unawareness of their crime against the laws of harmony that my brother was first silenced, then set sniggering, and soon we were both shaking with that convulsive merriment which sometimes assails one in places where it is strictly forbidden to laugh. The whole of the offending family gave us a very hard disapproving look after church, but I thought no more of it. Yet from that Monday onwards I had an uneasy feeling of something amiss in our village life, which I discounted as fantasy whenever it thrust itself upon my attentions, and certainly did not connect with the episode of our merriment in church. Yet despite my determination not to recognize it, this feeling steadily grew. Unfortunately, I did not know then, as I do now, how surely and wordlessly a change in the popular mood can communicate itself to those whom with the change is most concerned. During our school vacation, neither my brother nor I had great occasion to go out into the streets, but whenever I did so, I came back with a sense of uneasiness. It was as if some hostile force were secretly mobilizing against us. On occasions I would find myself in the main street at the sunniest hour of the day, looking over my shoulder, because of a sudden suspicion that I was being followed. Instantly I would laugh at myself for being so jumpy, since invariably all I saw were the familiar figures of some of the village lads dodging artfully behind the glistening pepper trees, or swiftly round the corner of a wall which stood out like a rock in the sea of summer heat, obviously playing hide-and-seek, I told myself. And so ridiculous did any other interpretation seem that I mentioned my apprehensions to no one, nor did I connect them with an added reserve in my brother's withdrawals. Then one Wednesday morning, from the moment I stepped into the street to carry out some errands for the house, I found this feeling of uneasiness subtly augmented. The manner in which I was greeted by the village, the looks I received, and the words spoken, seemed to carry some new content of climax whose existence I could no longer deny. In the afternoon I was sent to my brother to take some horses to the blacksmith who lived a little distance outside the village. The village itself was very silent, half asleep in the summer heat. The streets were empty, and our horses' hoofs echoed loudly from the walls of the white-faced houses. In the main grocer's window, between the drawn blind and the panes, a large orange tabby cat lay fast asleep in the sun. As we passed, the edge of the blind was suddenly drawn back, and the red head of the grocer's boy appeared, no doubt curious to see who rode out so loudly at so somnolent an hour of the day. He recognized us, and at once vanished so quickly that the blind, whipping back into position, flicked the sleeping cat smartly off the flank and sent it vanishing into a prodigious leap from the window shelf. Soon the hatless redhead emerged from the shop door, jumped the steps, and came running after us. "Hey!" he called out, and then when he caught up with us, "Up to the farm already?" he asked breathlessly. Everybody asked everybody their business in the world, and the question appeared to be no more than routine curiosity. "Only taking the horses over to the blacksmith," I replied. He stood over there for a moment, repeating the words over and over to himself, and then he gave my brother a sly glance, broke off hurriedly, "Well, I must be off! Tot scenes!" and disappeared in a golden blur of dust down the street. Again I felt uneasy, but merely shrugged my shoulders. What did it all mean? I'd been told to leave the horses at the blacksmith's and at once return home with my brother, because some cousins were coming that afternoon to call on us. But when the moment came, I felt myself oddly reluctant to enter. The smithy stood on the main crossroad at the edge of the Bushveld, about a mile from the village. Leaning hesitant in the open gateway outside the smithy, I saw that the country between us and the village was empty of people. Only a donkey and a cow with its calf were moving slowly about in a dream of after-dinner sleep, while an unfed gray falcon, suspended in a trance of blinding blue, trembled over their heads. It was all so silent and still that I stood on to let the familiar scene repulse my strange uneasiness. Then, distinctly through our vibrations of light, a cock crowed on the marches of our village. It has never been my favorite sound. In the indeterminate dawn hour between sleeping and waking, it is bad enough. But breaking out suddenly as this crowing did, reminding me that yet another uncomprehended afternoon was about to plunge steeply into fathomless night, I found it more than I could endure. The crucified sound coming straight out of the heart of an unrealized animal being seemed appropriately a prelude to some inevitability of suffering. I looked up to the top of the spire of our village church, which flaunted a cock rampant with a comb of stainless steel on its head, and for some reason I felt myself both reproached and warned by the sight. I stirred. I couldn't go on standing there all day, but I turned to give a last glance at the smithy behind me. The smith was drawing a shoe, made magic in fire, from the forge. Placing its eager gold onto the black anvil, he began expertly to batter it into shape for a horse stamping in the shade outside. Leaning on the bar of the bellows, a black apprentice flashed a smile at me. My brother, too, was watching, and had the excitement of the fire glowing in his eyes. I beckoned to him, and turning, we took the road to the village. Just before you enter our village, the road dips steeply to disappear in a dry riverbed, emerging 100 yards or so further on, almost at the beginning of the main street. As we were walking, I noticed in the distance dark figures hurriedly coming out of the village in clusters of 3 or 4, and taking the road down to the riverbed. I thought nothing of it until I realized that none of the figures emerged on our side of the riverbed. I stopped short in my tracks and turned to my brother. Looking down, I saw that his face had gone suddenly white under its olive shadow. His eyes were wide open, and the anguish of an unknown fear walked naked in them. "Have you seen what I have seen?" I asked, my lips oddly dry. He nodded. "Any idea what it means?" I asked curtly. "Yes, Ubud. They're after me." His voice was still with certainty as water is still with depth. "What?" I exclaimed, feeling my own uneasiness of the past few days rush in fast to confirm his reply. Then in the same breath I asked, "But why?" "Because of Sunday," he answered slowly. "I laughed at them in church on Sunday. They say I've insulted them, and they must teach me a lesson." "Nonsense," I protested. "What about me? I sniggered too." "It's me they're after, not you," he said darkly. "They like you, but they don't like me. 2 of the sons stopped me in the village on Monday and asked me what the great big joke on Sunday had been about. When I told them, they got so angry." "You told them?" I exclaimed, hardly believing my own ears. He seemed genuinely surprised at the disheartening tone of my voice. I just told them what happened," he explained, "and that I couldn't help laughing. Of course I said I was sorry if I hurt them, but it sounded so funny." He broke off, but despairing of his want of tact, I prodded him. "What did they say to that?" "They said so much and so fast I can hardly remember, Ubud," he answered miserably. "They said I was a liar and dared me to repeat what I'd said. They asked if I thought I knew more about singing than their parents did, and when I said that, honestly, they'd all been—" "I see," I interrupted. "There was no need to know more. And now they're all waiting down there in the riverbed to teach you or both of us a lesson, eh?" He nodded his head somberly, then added, "Not both of us, Ubud. Only me. They like you, I tell you, but they don't like me. The singing is just an excuse, really," he faltered. "They don't even want to beat me. They want to," his voice dropped to a whisper, "to pull the clothes off my back and make fun of, you know." No, I protested, appalled. For after all, the same ghost had burrowed for so long in the foundations of both our minds. For a moment I thought of retreating on the smithy, waiting for our horses, and then riding back fast through the crowd of young lads that had collected for the sort of brawl that was one of their favorite sports. I thought also of taking some roundabout path and thereby avoiding the dry river crossing between us and our home. But just at that very instant, as if fate had commanded it, one of the older boys came out of the riverbed, climbed onto a boulder sparkling like a fabulous garnet in the sun, saw us, put his hands to his mouth, and called out loudly and provocatively an unmistakable challenge. I have been over this phase of the incident many times in my mind. I know that the sensible thing to do would still have been to avoid the crowd of boys, or even to wait for the storm to blow over, as these village upsets sometimes did. Yet once that boy had seen me and knew that I had seen him, I was no longer a free agent, but a prisoner of the situation. It was impossible for me to do anything else but go on, because everyone expected that and nothing else of me. Whatever price the drama was going to exact from us all, it was presupposed that I would play my part exactly as I did. The ancient pattern conditioning the minds of the youth of our village from that fateful Saturday onwards was such that they were instinctively, without any special word of command or active leadership, committed to a conspiracy wherein they would all serve a moment when my brother and I could be confronted together, and alone, without any chance of interference from our elders. But I knew none of this at that time. I knew only that under the empty and unseeing blue sky from which even the witness of the hungry falcon had been withdrawn, I had to go on and get over that crossing with my awkward brother as best as I could. Feeling sick in my stomach, I moved forward. My brother, however, still blanched at the prospect. Putting his broad plowman's hand on my arm to restrain me, he said in an incredulous voice, "But, Uboot, if you go, they'll tear the clothes off my back and mock me for—" I pushed his hand roughly away and said with bitter resignation, "It's too late now for anything else, but I'll not let them touch you if I can help it. Look, when we get to the riverbed, I want you to go straight on. I want you to promise me to walk straight on home, and not look back whatever happens. If you're right and they've nothing against me, then you've no need to worry." He opened his mouth to protest, but I shook him roughly and said, "For Christ's sake, do what you're told! You've already caused trouble enough." It was the oath that did it. That form of swearing is absolutely forbidden among decent people in my country. I don't think I've ever tried it before. To this day I find it strange that I should ever have used it then, and that hearing it, my brother should have come forward without demur to walk like a shadow at my side. Some minutes before we came to the dip in the road, we could hear the quick buzz which comes from an excited crowd. The sound rose high into the bright air around us, and harmonized uncannily with the feverish tempo of the light and constant murmur of heat which always trembles in our Bushveld afternoon silences. But as we came nearer, the buzz quickly detached itself from the general rhythm of the day, and hit us like the noise of a crowd at some public demonstration. Nevertheless, directly my brother and I came out on the riverbank, someone called out joyfully, "Look, Obuchis, they're here!" Instantly, the crowd went as silent as a tomb. I had not much eye for detail at that moment, nor indeed for anything save the sullen shade and earthquake rumble of the dark necessity which drew my brother and myself. Yet as I took in the general outline of that mass of oddly expectant faces arranged in a half-moon on the level surface of the riverbed, I saw that not a boy under 16 from our village was absent, and that some pimply over 17s had been thrown in for the generous measure that fate reserves for these occasions. I remember also that the glare in those eyes focused on me and my brother seemed fired with a blazing cannibal hunger, which I had never seen before on human faces, though today I know it only too well. Then quickly I marked down two figures standing apart from the rest and facing us. Bitterly I recognized the principals in the scene, the two toughest of the occupants of the pew behind us. As my eyes met theirs, one shifted his hobbledehoy weight uneasily onto another foot, and the other licked his lips with apparent nervousness. "Remember," I whispered to my brother, "not a word to anyone. Walk past them and straight home. I'll do all the talking that's necessary." He made no reply. Silently we approached. Though we had known those present all our young lives, no one called out a greeting, They just sat or lolled against the riverbanks, staring at us with that strange hunger in their eyes. My brother, devastated by the brilliance of that masked, impersonal stare, tried desperately to look for comfort in some eye not hostile to him. But those faces were not glaring so much at us, but at the event that they longed to bring about through us. At last we came close to the two standing apart, waiting in the middle of the riverbed. I could hear their hard breathing. My brother and I stepped to the side in order to pass them. At that, a hiss of imperative meaning escaped from the crowd like steam from a high-pressure boiler. Automatically, the biggest of the two grasped my brother by the arm and said, "Not so fast, you misshapen bastard!" As if long rehearsed for the part, I moved in between them, pushed him aside, and said quietly to my brother, "Remember your promise." In the same breath, I turned to face his opponent. The crowd sighed with relief. Tongues licked expectant lips as quickly as those of our lizards when they deftly flicked some ripe insect sparkle from the air into their saffron mouths. The occasion was developing according to their satisfaction. "Get out of my way, cousin," the youth growled at me. "Our quarrel isn't with you, but with that abortion of a brother of yours." "I shan't get out of your way," I told him, my heart beating wildly. "You're not going to touch my brother. He's much younger and smaller than you." I forbore to add that my opponent was also a good deal bigger than I. For a moment he stood there undecided, looking first at me and then at my brother, who was walking fast up to the far bank and toward the village with an apparent willingness so different in spirit from the reluctant promise which I had extracted from him, that even I was surprised and perhaps somewhat shocked. Then my enemy looked back from my brother to the one-eyed crowd, and in its glance read his instructions. I had just time to see my brother scramble up the far bank and break into a run when he exploded in hoarse, militant sarcasm. "Well, you've asked for it!" and came for me hitting out fast with both hands. Excitement heaved the crowd to its feet and sent it rushing to form an eager ring around us. He was, as I said, bigger than I, and I never had much hope of beating him, quite apart from the fact that while we fought his brother danced around exhorting him to finish me and threatening to join in if the other failed. I don't know how long we fought. I am told that after the first few minutes I was clearly the loser, but I was unaware of the fact. In me, some stranger had taken over. He did the thinking and the hitting for me, and robbed me of all feelings. Yes, someone of infinite experience became master of my situation. Then suddenly, on the far perimeter of the storm of my senses, came a new sound. Someone was bellowing like a bull at the crowd of boys and hitting out at them. Simultaneously, we stopped fighting, and looking round in amazement, we saw the crowd scattering fast, and the big figure of the village lay preacher lashing out right and left with his horsewhip as he came towards us, my brother following close behind him. "Are you all right, U-Boot?" my brother implored, even before he reached me. I don't know why, but at his words, rage boiled over like water in a kettle inside me. "You no business," I told him, panting furiously, "to fetch him here." The village moralist was still pursuing the fleeing multitude with his whip. "Why didn't you go home as I told you?" A few of the boys who had not yet fled apparently heard my words, for on the way home, whenever we passed groups of excited boys in the street, obviously discussing the fight and the respective merits of the two performances, they gave me a look of approval. For my brother, there was only a scornful glance. He did not protest, but walked silently beside me like a condemned person. Occasionally I could feel him trying to get me to look at him. However, I kept my outraged eyes firmly on the street, watching our shadows thrown up by the vast westering sun behind us, growing larger and longer, darkening the scarlet dust of Africa and taking the color out of the pink, red, and white berries of the heavily scented pepper trees, which lay like the beads of a broken necklace around our feet. To this day I have only to smell the whiff of green peppers in the air, to see our shadows side by side, staining the hungry dust, and to feel again the retarded horror of the inflexible condemnation in my heart. When we did get home, my brother rushed straight to our father with an account of what had happened. He made me out to have been a kind of David who had faced a village Goliath, but before he had finished, the whole family had come in to listen absorbed to his tale. As I went to bathe my bruised face in the bathroom, I heard them murmur their spontaneous approval. The tone of their words warmed me through like wine. Even so, I noticed that no one expressed approval of my brother for his deed of rescue in my need. That night, as we lay in our bed on the stoop, listening to the jackals barking with frantic mournfulness on the margin of our little village so deeply marooned in the black Bushveld sea, I heard a sob break from my brother. "What's the matter?" I heard a sob break from my brother. "What's the matter, O Klein Booty?" I asked quickly, turning over towards him. The unexpected note of concern in my voice was too much for him. He began sobbing without effort at self-control, and then gasped out, "I don't want you to have to fight for me. Please don't always fight for me. If you do, you'll end up by hating me one day, and I don't want you to hate me too, Uboot." I was a witness then of the starry prancing impies of the night throwing down their assegais and watering the heroic heaven of Africa with their gentlest tears.